NEPA Freethought Society is a social, educational, activist, and philosophical coalition of non-believers in the northeastern Pennsylvania region predicated on support and community. More information about the NEPA Freethought Society, including upcoming meetings, special guest speaker appearances, and much more, can be found at nepafreethought.org. The podcast is available for free on the iTunes Store and through an RSS feed on our website. Listen to past episodes of this podcast on iTunes or our website at nepafreethought.org. Support the podcast and the NEPA Freethought Society by clicking the support button at the top of our website and share the podcast with friends. Contact with us following on Twitter at NEPA Podcast and liking our Facebook page. Questions and comments can be emailed to podcast@nepafreethought.org. Joining us today is Dr. Darrel Ray.
Well, thanks, Justin, for having me on today. This is a good opportunity to talk about something near and dear to me, the Secular Therapist Project. Been a clinical psychologist and organizational psychologist my entire career, and author of several books. The last two, The God Virus, which some of your listeners may have read, and my newest book, Sex and God: How Religion Distorts Sexuality. But right now, my passion and my focus has been on how to deal with the problem of too many Christian counselors out there in the world and not enough secular ones.
All right, so you mentioned that your latest initiative is the Secular Therapist Project. Can you tell some listeners about what that project is?
Yeah, it goes back to when I first published The God Virus, almost three and a half years ago, and I was getting emails and phone calls from people all over the nation, all over the world in some cases, saying, I sure wish you could help me find a therapist. Or I've been to 3 therapists and they all end up telling me go back to church, or I need to be more spiritual, or I need to get one with the universe, or something like that. And I would say, well, here's the things to look for in a good, well-trained therapist. And they would do that, and lo and behold, they'd still end up with somebody who's loosey-goosey or New Age or even Christian or Mormon. And then they'd come back to me and say, well, that didn't work either. And slowly dawned on me over the last 3 years that it's hard to find a counselor that doesn't have a spiritual bias or a religious bias or a New Age bias.
One phrase that pops up in the science community is the phrase evidence-based. So can you talk about that phrase in relation to therapy?
Well, there's lots of psychotherapy theories, but there's only a few that have been actually tested in some kind of rigorous scientifically using a scientific method. One of the most common, that's the most well-tested, is cognitive behavioral therapy, first pioneered by Albert Ellis, actually a mentor of mine back in the late 70s. But cognitive behavioral therapy, rational emotive therapy, and other therapies related to cognition and behavior and emotion have been pretty rigorously tested against other therapies, and they generally come out ahead of any other group. Whereas psychoanalysis, for example, has absolutely no evidence whatsoever that it works. And there's various trends and various fads among psychotherapy and psychotherapists that sound good, but when you put them to the real test, they don't hold any water. They don't hold up to scientific examination. For example, there's been research over the years that would put a Jungian approach against a client-centered approach against a cognitive behavioral approach and see which one of these comes out with the best outcomes on a randomized group of people. That's a fairly rigorous way to look at something, and virtually every research around those kinds of things, cognitive behaviorists come out ahead. And then, of course, there's the kind of research that would look at how do drugs work against other kinds of talk therapy, and research shows that talk therapy is about equal in some cases. I mean, I don't want to overgeneralize here, but talk therapy may be equal to drug therapy, but together they're much better. Good drug therapy only kind of papers over or puts a Band-Aid over the emotional issues or the thinking problems. And cognitive therapy may not be able to deal with the chemical imbalance that's gotten out of control in the brain. So if you put the two together, you get a pretty powerful set of tools. And they're evidence-based in the sense that we know from clinical studies going back 20 and 30 years that these techniques work. They work on things like depression, whether acute or chronic depression. They work on substance abuse kinds of issues. They work on relationship issues. I mean, there's a lot of value in having an evidence-based approach. So that's what we're looking at. It's a secular therapist is going to generally use those kinds of approaches. They're not going to be into psychotherapy like Freudian therapy, psychoanalysis, which has no evidence at all, or Jungian analysis, which has virtually no evidence. Probably the worst thing is the 12-step programs in addictions rehabilitation, because they're nothing but a religion in disguise. I mean, we joke in our recovering from religion groups that we only need 10 steps to get out. When you take God out of it, you only need 10 steps.
I've heard these before.
So that's kind of the framework that we're coming from. Here's the problem. If I got in the phone book or on the internet and I looked for a therapist that was secular, I couldn't find one. You cannot point in the phone book and say, oh, there is a secular therapist, because they can't advertise. I mean, a person I live in Kansas City. If you advertise as a secular therapist, as an atheist therapist, as a humanist therapist, you'd lose all your religious referrals. A lot of psychologists get referrals from ministers and churches. Well, the minute you came out, you'd lose all of those clients. Also, many of the clients coming to any given psychotherapist are religious themselves. The minute they found out that you were an atheist or secularist, they'd probably refuse to go or stop coming. So you really have a problem. The general public doesn't want to talk or interact with atheists. So if you're a psychotherapist, you have to keep that quiet. So let's say I'm a client. I'm looking for a therapist. I get online, and I don't care what I tell them, what criteria I use. I will not be able to say in advance, this person is guaranteed to be secular. I won't be able to do that. I can say, oh, he's got good training in cognitive behavioral therapy, perhaps, or in some other cognitive or evidence-based therapy, but I won't be able to say if he's going to end up telling me to go back to church or not. I just literally today was talking with a person, and she said she did all her research. She actually lives right here in town. She done all her research. She's actually in a social work program herself, so she's no dummy. She knows what she's looking for. She ends up going to a therapist, and after 3 sessions, and the therapist says, yeah, I'm Christian, but I don't let that get in my way. You can be an atheist. And she told the therapist up front that she was an atheist. Well, at about the 3rd session, the therapist says, you need to get back in touch with your spiritual side.
Oh.
So
there's no guarantee there.
Yeah, it took 3 sessions, and then she finds out she's dealing with a spiritual person. Well, that's bullshit. You don't want to have to spend your good money, your hard-earned money, on somebody that's going to end up telling you to get back in touch with the universe, or get in touch with your spiritual side, or go back to church, or pray more, or any of those kinds of things. So what we're endeavoring to do, and Hand Hills out of North Carolina has just done a wonderful job putting a website together that's very functional, and we're going to continue to improve it. But what we've got is a place for therapists to quietly register with us and stay under the radar, so to speak. They can put whatever they want up on their profile, but we're vetting these folks. So if you look, I know you're in school, and let's say you graduate and you want to become a therapist, you register with us. There will be 4 of us, myself and 3 other well-trained secular psychotherapists. We'll look at your application. We'll look at your website. We'll look at any materials you submit, and we'll decide whether you get included in our database or not. And if for example, one person submitted their stuff, and on the surface of it, she looked pretty good until I scratched down below the surface on her website and found out she's also a spiritual channel.
Spiritual channel?
Yeah, a spiritual channel. So, that's not evidence-based. So needless to say, she wasn't included in our database. So that's what we're trying to do. We are screening out those folks. You can be very sure that somebody in our database is not going to send you back to church, or tell you to pray more, or get in touch with the universe, or align your chakras, or any of that crap. They're going to help you with evidence-based methods that we know are viable and work.
Right. So it seems that the professional thing for therapists to do, if they are religious, would be to keep religion out of the session, for lack of a better phrase, if the client didn't ask for it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly, that's what they're oftentimes trained to do. That doesn't mean they're going to do it. Here's the scary thing, Justin, that right now, I can't cite statistics, but it's pretty obvious what's going on. Places like Jerry Falwell University, Liberty University, or Regents University, or George Fox University, these really, really conservative universities or colleges are graduating people that are licensable in marriage and family counseling. And these folks, oftentimes at Regents University, they have to take an extra year of theology. So it's Pat Robertson theology that you're going to get when you go to that counselor. It's marriage according to Pat Robertson. It's anti-homosexuality according to Pat Robertson. I mean, these therapists cannot go to Pat Robertson University in a graduate program and leave without being totally brainwashed into religion. I don't see how they can keep their religion out of it. So if you went in and said, I'm an atheist and I want to get some therapy and deal with some depression, I don't think that person's, well, it's going to be extra difficult for them to keep the religion out. So it adds a layer of complexity to the therapist's job to keep that out of the equation. And you're paying for that extra complexity as a client. Why do you want to pay this person to have to jump through hoops to keep their religion out of it when they should be trained not to do it in the first place, and they shouldn't even be, I don't think Jerry Falwell University or Liberty University should be allowed. I mean, I can't have nothing to do with it, but that kind of stuff it's certainly not secular. They're Christian counselors, and they oftentimes call themselves Christian counselors. But even people who don't call themselves Christian counselors still are very religious. I know some PhD psychologists that are incredibly religious. And I honestly don't see how that doesn't inform their approach to clients.
Right. So maybe a lot of our listeners aren't familiar with the process of actually finding a counselor as a client. So can you describe that to the listeners and perhaps talk about some of the difficulties that might come along with that?
Yeah, it's you can get you'll get online and you'll look for a counselor or psychologist in your area or social worker in your area, and you look at their website and everything. They describe themselves very in flowery terms and very client-centered terms and all this sort of stuff. But you don't really know what their real training is. You're not an expert in evaluating their training. Many people wouldn't know what Liberty University is. A lot of people wouldn't know what Regents University is. It sounds like a good university. So you could end up going to someone who's actually a fundamentalist Christian, but is licensed in your state as a counselor. I mean, licensing is a matter of a bunch of coursework and passing a test. It doesn't mean you're not going to try and indoctrinate people into your God delusion. So it's difficult to find. So what we're trying to do is create a website where if you wanted to find a client, you could come to our website. You want to find a psychologist that could help you and is definitely going to be secular, then you come to our website and do a search and see if there's any psychologists in your zip code or close to your zip code, within 50 miles or whatever. And if there is somebody, then you correspond with them through our site. You can't go directly to them because we have to be careful not to out anybody. We don't want therapists being outed as atheists because that can mess up their practice, because a lot of religious people go to their practice and ministers refer them to the practices. So, and some religions are very suspicious of psychologists anyway, as in Scientologists and Jehovah's Witnesses. They actually forbid the members to go to a psychologist. And a lot of religions, like the Baptists don't prohibit their members from going to a psychologist, but they are very suspicious of psychologists, so they try to push them towards things like Christian counselors and stuff like that. So you get online and you do a search and you find somebody and you correspond with them through our system. It's kind of like Match.com or eHarmony. You don't get the other person's email address or phone number or anything until you're comfortable. Both of you are comfortable. And then they might send you a phone number or send you an email and you correspond outside of our system then. but it protects both parties. The therapist isn't going to be out as an atheist, and the client's clearly going to get somebody who's been vetted by us, four of us. There's four of us secular therapists that evaluate anybody that applies, and we vote. Nobody knows how anybody else's votes is voting. So of the four of us, we vote independently. I don't know how anybody else is going to vote before they vote. And if somebody gets 3 out of 4 votes, we look at them really closely, and if the one person has a question, we'll clear the question out if we need to. And a lot of the therapists that we're getting all four of us are voting in favor because they're very clearly secular. They may be involved in one of the atheist groups in their local community. They may be involved with Planned Parenthood. It just tells me they're pretty secular and or at least friendly to say. I mean, there could be religious people in Planned Parenthood, but they're at least open-minded enough and not got an agenda around that kind of stuff.
Right. So now, how can people contribute to the Therapist Project if they are, for lack of a better term, non-therapists or non-clients?
Well, we are desperate for funds, so they'd be happy to contribute. We go to our Recovering from Religion page, and there's a donate button there. Just click on it. We're desperate for money to continue developing this website. But probably the most important thing is, every organization needs money, and I don't want to downplay that because we do. But what we need right now, as much or more than funds, is for therapists, people who are already therapists, to register with us. We have 35 therapists in North America that are already registered and approved, but we figure we need about 200 therapists to make this viable. They have to be geographically distributed. Right now, if you were in Wichita, Kansas, there's nobody within 300 miles of you in our database yet. So we need to find people in every geographic area that are secular and have them register with us. And on the other side, if you need a therapist, we need you to go to our site first. Search our site first. If there's nobody there close to you, you can still retain someone to counsel you over the phone or on Skype. There's a number of therapists in our database that'll work with anybody at a distance, in a distance relationship. And if you can't find anybody that way or don't want to deal long distance, then you can go look for somebody else in your community. But if you do find a good therapist, tell them to register with us. We've had two register just in the last 2 days that came from clients. Clients told the therapist about this project, and the therapist turned around and registered with us, which is really cool. Gives us that's a good way to get them, because they're an atheist client, so they evidently trust this therapist to be objective about their atheism.
So earlier we talked about the harm of introducing religion into counseling. What would be your advice for therapists who happen to be religious who are therapists?
Well, you can be a good therapist and still be religious. I know that because I was a therapist 25, 30 years ago when I was still religious. And I think I did a pretty decent job of keeping religion out of it. The problem is that once you do have this presupposition around how people should live their lives based on biblical principles or whatever, it adds a layer of complexity to your own thinking process. And it really takes some skill to make sure that doesn't creep in as you're working with a client. And I'm not saying it can't be done. I've known some darn good therapists that go to church every Sunday. We're not disqualifying those people from our database right up front. But we are being pretty careful. If they apply to us, we want them to convince us that they can do as much as possible. They can keep that separate. Without going into the nitty-gritty of how you the training of a psychotherapist and the supervision of a new therapist and all that, I don't know that I can answer your question much better than that.
Okay. Have you received any pushback yet to this initiative from religious communities or even from the secular community?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, Justin, I fully expected it, and it hasn't materialized very much. I got one little pushback recently. Somebody said, "Oh, this is just for people that are leaving religion," and I want to change that perception. This is not for people leaving religion. It's for anybody. It's for mental health. It's for secular mental health. Now, they may have gotten that idea because the Secular Therapist Project is under the umbrella of Recovering from Religion. And it's the organization I founded 3 years ago that Jerry DeWitt's the executive director of now. Do you know Jerry?
Yep, I've heard him speak at other cons.
Great. Yeah, Jerry DeWitt's first graduate of the Clergy Project. And he's running RR now, so it's easy to think, well, Therapist Project is under that, so it must be for people recovering. But it's not. Another therapist pushed back with me when we asked him to register with us, and he said, well, I don't need to register. I live in San Francisco. There's almost no religious people here. Well, you may be right there, but that's not the case in Kansas City where I live, or in Dallas, Texas, or Houston, or Minneapolis, or Chicago. I mean, the whole middle part of the United States is just counselors. A friend of mine in Atlanta says you can find three Christian counselors on every block, and you can't find a single secular counselor in the whole town sometimes. Not that they're not there, but you just can't find them because they can't advertise. There's just thousands and thousands of Christian counselors out there. I know my own alma mater's had this marriage and family program for over 20 years. Friends University out of Wichita, Kansas. It's a very religious-based therapy program, and one of my relatives graduated from it, and her training was atrocious. And she herself, it's an whole other story. But she wasn't, she could have dealt with a lot of the therapy herself, but she never did it. Felt that she was in need of great amount of help herself. So I don't have a lot of respect for these Christian universities that are graduating all these people with this religious ideas about how you do therapy. And depression and post-traumatic stress disorder and sexual dysfunction and relationship issues and all that stuff has got a neuropsychology to it. And you really do need these, in this day and age, we need to be more cognizant of how the physiology and the neuropsychology of the brain is working. And a lot of these people aren't getting trained in that. They don't believe it in the first place. I mean, they have a model that doesn't count the chemicals that go on in the brain, that doesn't consider, what's the neuropsychology of depression and how do you deal with that, both with cognitively and chemically. So a person is poorly trained in that area is not going to be able to provide the right guidance and the right support for that person.
So now, along with counselors who might happen to push religion on clients, do you also hear feedback about problems that LGBT individuals might have in the counseling relationship?
We haven't done this, haven't intentionally pushed that side of it, but I have been very pleasantly surprised with the number of therapists that are registered with us that are LGBT themselves or very friendly to therapy with that particular target group. I think we've got, at least right now, I'd put the group of people we've got against almost anybody in the therapist world for the amount of training and experience they've got with the LGBT community. But yeah, I hear a lot from my LGBT friends that they've gone to 3 therapists and therapists don't know how to relate to them or preconceived notions about what a transgender person is or what the homosexual lifestyle is or whatever, and it's very discouraging to go to somebody that's supposedly well trained and yet isn't very knowledgeable about the problems this person's facing. So I'm really pleased with people that get great people. We've got three or four in our client base that come right out and say, I'm an active gay man and I'm very interested in helping LGBT people in the community. So you can't ask for much more than that, I think.
So where is the Therapist Project heading now? What can you look at in the next 3 months or so?
Well, our goal is to get 200 therapists registered by the end of this year. And we've got 35 so far. We've only been doing it less than a month, probably a little more than 3 weeks, actually. So hopefully with shows like this, talking to people and getting people to talk about it, we'll get more registered. Because it's not like a dating site. If if you're a woman and you're wanting to date a man and you go to the dating site and there's no men there, you're probably not going to come back, or vice versa. So you got to have enough people to date. So we need enough therapists on site to make it worthwhile for people to spend a little time and look and do a search on the site. And then, so that's our real goal, is to get enough therapists to make it worthwhile for people to look at. We're also doing refinements. We've got the basic structure down and it's working very well. We finished all the bugs just this week. There was a couple bugs we were pulling our hair out over, but all that's finished. And we're seeing good communication between clients. So far, we've got about a dozen clients that have contacted therapists in our database already. And we're watching. I'm the only one me and the administrator, we're the only ones that can watch that. But we're watching the interactions, and it looks like it's going very smoothly, and people are able to contact and correspond with therapists pretty easily. And we're very pleased with that. We'll probably add some functionality to the website. There's a lot of other things out there, Justin, that just dovetail. When I started recovering from religion 3 years ago, I was just trying to find a way to help people who are leaving religion deal with family problems and relationship problems. And there are, when somebody's been religious all their life and they got married in the church, I'd say the husband tells his wife he's an atheist, she might divorce him over that, or she might stop sleeping with him. And there was quite a few issues I saw coming out of that problem with religion. That's partly why I founded Recovering from Religion. And people meet, within Recovering from Religion, people meet every month to talk about, how do I deal with my in-laws who are very religious, and now that I'm an atheist, they won't speak to me anymore. How do I raise kids, because I don't want to raise them like I was raised. So we've got that. It's kind of a self-help structure in place right now. And it's working pretty darn well. We've got over 100 groups throughout the United States that are meeting on at least a monthly basis, and some even more. And people are really getting help from those. But that's more like Alcoholics Anonymous, so to speak. It's a self-help group. And for those people who've got real critical issues in relationships and marriages and depression and post-traumatic stress around religion, they need something to help more intense than just a self-help group.
Right. So the community groups alone aren't going to be enough. So that's perhaps where the Therapist Project can come in.
Right. And we're adding that to Recovering from Religion. And the cool thing is, as a result of this effort that we've been doing, word's getting out, and new or other organizations are saying, wait a minute, we can plug into this. For example, there's a group, I can't remember her name, Rebecca, started an organization called Grief Beyond Belief. And it's a self-help group to deal with grief issues in a secular way. And I thought, cool, that fits right within what we're trying to do. And there's another group out of Nebraska called No Longer Quivering. And it's a former Quiverful movement woman who's now an atheist.
Is that Vicki Garrison?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't remember her name right. Vicki Garrison, I love her. And she started Quiverful a couple of years ago. Well, her effort fits perfectly with what we're trying to do. So it's like we're getting a real cool synergy among all these efforts, and they're kind of feeding each other, and we're helping her, and she's helping us, and as a result, it should start feeding into the Therapist Project. The Secular Therapist Project could be the recipient, because as leaders, let's say there's a leader in Phoenix, and they've got some members in the Recovery from Religion group, and one is really having problems dealing with X, Y, or Z emotional issue, then the leader now knows about Secular Therapist Project, and could refer them to us. So, and this is all, we're a nonprofit, we're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we're fully, whatever you have to do to be that kind of a corporation. I'm not into that part of it, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
A psychologist, not a lawyer.
All right, so we'll move on at this point to questions from our studio audience. So we'll go first to Jason, the podcast producer.
Hi, Darrell. I have 2 questions for you. So I've noticed a common theme amongst many Christians and or conservatives of trying to frame the use of depression and anxiety medication as of being no help and only being effective at numbing people's lives, and, as they stress it, numbing their faith. So, I mean, I find this very alarming, being that depression is a serious disease that, it has a mortality rate. So do you see any resistance in the use of medication, whether it be by therapists prescribing it or by patients refusing it?
Well, yeah, there are actually churches, ministers, and ministers are terrible counselors, and they're not trained, but they're oftentimes the first person that a religious person goes to is the minister.
Yeah.
And I've seen way too many ministers counseling people not to take medications. It usually comes from the more fundamentalists, the more liberal ones like the Presbyterians, Methodists, Episcopalians. They don't make those kinds of statements to pick people. But also, let's be clear, the prescription of medications, generally speaking, is done by a psychiatrist.
Right.
Talk therapy and evaluation of a patient is oftentimes done with a psychologist. And the general public gets those confused, oftentimes, because it sounds a lot alike. And of course, in addition, there's lots of clinically licensed social workers who do a lot of the same things that psychologists do, but neither psychologists nor social workers can actually prescribe medication. So what happens is you go to the psychologist for your depression, or the social worker for your depression, and almost any psychologist or social worker worth their salt is going to be affiliated in some way with a psychiatrist who can prescribe meds. So they'll have a few sessions with you, and they'll say, I think our talk therapy is going to go very well. I think we're probably going to make a lot of progress, but it'll go even better if you consider medication for the next 3 months or 6 months while we go through this. And I want to give you the name of the psychiatrist and go visit them. And then the psychologists work together to coordinate the meds and the talk therapy. Now, and that's the beauty of the research. We know that in many, not many, but in a lot of cases, some drug therapy and talk therapy together are far more effective than either alone. So you can get off of the drugs in 6 or 8 months. Well, here's the thing I'm starting to talk a lot about, and this is where we do get some pushback. Religion itself has and encourages mental illness. I mean, if you believe that you could just pray depression away, you're going to make it worse. You cannot pray depression away. Right. And you just look back at Martin Luther, the famous Martin Luther, or St. Augustine, or some of these saints, and you look at their lives, and they were clinically depressed. There's no doubt about it. Just read their own autobiographies. And the only way they got out of it was by killing people a lot of times.
Yeah.
Well, we don't want to give that advice to our listeners. So.
Does that answer your question, Jason, at least a little bit?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I do have a second question based on what you and Justin were talking about earlier, saying where as a patient you might go to a therapist for a couple of sessions, pay that money, and then part of their suggestion is some sort of spiritual solution. So do you think it would be help or hurt the quality of the care you might receive if you're on your first visit, you say, look, just lay out some ground rules. I'm not really looking for any kind of spiritual solutions. I'm looking for, the evidence-based solutions. Do you think that might help or hurt the quality of care you might get?
Jason, I would very much encourage that. I think that's exactly what a patient should do. The minute they walk into that office, they should say right up front, I am an atheist, or I'm a humanist, I'm a secularist, whatever you call yourself, and I am not interested in any religious or spiritual solutions to my problem. I want to stay evidence-based.
Great.
And you, as a psychologist, do that for me.
Yeah.
And you, as a social worker, do that for me. Or a psychiatrist, give it a shot. But they should be honest enough, and I have known therapists that were honest enough to say, I probably can't. I go to church every Sunday, and I'm pretty devout. I probably can't do that. So let me give you a number or a name for somebody else who can.
Yeah.
Now, that's why we have the Secular Therapist Project, so you don't even have to worry about that. When you go into one of our therapists' office, he or she is not going to suggest any kind of spiritual solution to your problem.
Great. And I thank you very much for your work, because I think it's very much needed for our community. So thank you very much.
Okay, so to move on to some other questions from a member of the audience.
Hi, Darrel. First, I just want to say I really love this project and really can empathize with it as somebody who did a lot of growing up in the South, and one time was sent home from school and wasn't allowed to return until I had approval from either a therapist or a minister from the public school.
That's funny. Who am I talking to?
My name's Trinity.
Kennedy?
Trinity.
Okay.
Don't pick on her for the name. We have a member called Faith too, so.
Right.
So I just wanted to clarify if there are any. I know you mentioned the combining both talk and drug therapy, but are there other standards of care that therapists have to live up to be put in your database? Since I mean, it varies so much from state to state, and even then, like being licensed is so vague and so optional, and
Right.
so many other problems.
You're absolutely right. And we are intentionally, we make no promise about the quality of the people in our database, about their training. All we say is, to the best of our knowledge and through our investigation, they meet the standard of being a secular therapist. They may be the worst counselor in the world. We're not in a position to evaluate that. So that's a disclaimer. I don't want anybody going here and saying, well, Darrel said this is the best group in the world. They're not necessarily. But what we say is that we're pretty darn sure they're secular, and you're not going to get the problems of described earlier. There's really no way that we have to defer to the states around licensing and qualifications and all that. We're not interested in that. It's not the focus of what we're trying to do. We're not being a substitute for a licensing agency or accreditation or anything like that. It's really a pretty simple mission to make sure the people on our database are secular. And that's the best we can guarantee. But that's a hell of a lot better than what we've got right now. I would hope you agree with that. But that's
Oh, definitely. At least improves your chances, I would say.
yeah, it does. I think it improves it quite a bit.
I had another question, and just kind of as maybe a little bit of a suggestion or idea to kind of further the project. Is this isn't a problem that's limited to psychiatrists and psychologists. Especially I'm a transgender individual, and I have a lot of problems with the entirety of my medical care and religion being involved in that, and doctors, and just trying to get treated in any way, and that maybe like a further project down the line could include just secular doctors in general.
Well, you know something? You're the third or fourth person that suggested that to us, and we are taking that very seriously, Trinity. I think I have my hands full right now with this project. But now that we've got the infrastructure in place, it will be possible for us to add that kind of functionality to our system. And I know for example, in the BDSM world, there's an entire list of BDSM lifestyle friendly physicians. So you can just get in their database and find a physician hopefully close to you. But their system is not as sophisticated as ours. It's not as user-friendly as ours. But I could see us doing something like what they're doing for a wide range of things, like physicians. So I think you're right on target. I agree with you entirely. I just don't have time to do it right now. And we have no resources. I mean, Hannah and I have done this all on budget. We have not $1 has been put into this except to buy domain name sites and stuff like that. So Han Hills has put in hundreds, maybe 1,000 hours in developing this, and I just can't sing his praises enough. He's an amazing guy, and he's done this all for free, just because he sees the potential for really helping a lot of people, and I couldn't have done it without him, actually.
Yeah, I didn't want to take away at all from what you're already doing, or just as something that could, like I said, I could see it very easily being added to the infrastructure you already have in place. So just maybe a further project down the line, like I said, it's just something there's also a need for. But thank you very much.
All right, great. So would you like to toss out some book information, URLs, group names, or whatever? This is a good time. You can put plugs for yourself and your organizations at the end of the podcast, so feel free to do that.
Oh, okay. Well, my new book, Sex and God, How Religion Distorts Sexuality, just came out a couple months ago, and it deals with a lot of the things we just talked about, especially around sexuality and transgender issues, and and therapy. So yeah, I'd really like to let people know about that. Also, if you're interested in recovering from religion or the Secular Therapist Project, go to recoveringfromreligion.org and look at the resources. We have tons of resources on there. We've got several pages. We got lots of people as they're coming out of religion. It's not just the Secular Therapist Project. And if you or your group want speakers that will speak on these subjects, you can contact us through the Recovering From website. You can contact me or Jerry DeWitt. We've got some great people on our board of directors, including Fred Phelps' son, Nate Phelps. Nate's on our board of directors and a very active member of it. So there's some cool people involved in this effort. Other than that is the website, the main website for what we've been talking about here today, seculartherapy.org.